Poetry is more than a body of writings or a typology of forms. First and foremost, it is an evolving set of practices that engage and are engaged by the creative work of others. During the extensive conversations leading up to this document, a few central themes about poetic practice emerged. The first was that poets generally, though not universally, want their poetry to be as widely available to potential audiences as possible, both during their lifetimes and beyond. However, poets, especially those not working in and for new media formats, expressed anxiety about how new media might affect their ability to make money from their work and to establish and advance academic careers. And they were concerned about the ease with which new media enable others to distribute and alter their poems without permission. At the same time, poets urgently expressed their need to use material derived from the poems of others, including 20th and 21st century writers, in their own work, and their desire to do so in ways that were both ethically and legally appropriate. Poetry, as a highly elusive art form, fundamentally relies on the poet's ability to quote, to copy, and to play with others' language. And poetry scholars and commentators equally rely on their ability to quote the poetry they are discussing. In fact, poets generally acknowledge that essentially everything they do in their workaday lives, from making their poems to writing about poetry to teaching poetry, builds on the work of others. In the group conversations, poets communicated a general sense that their ability to do their work with confidence was often impeded by institutional regulations based on very straitened interpretations of copyright. They lacked clear guidance as to what material might be available in the public domain. Moreover, they were constrained by their own lack of certainty about what uses are and are not fair within the practices of poetry. While they certainly wish to appropriately control their own work and to make money where money is to be made, poets also expressed a strong wish to affirm the importance of their ability to make reasonable, unlicensed uses of copyrighted material and their support for such uses by others of their own works. In this, the poets both exemplified the tensions inherent in copyright law and the fair use doctrine and heartily endorsed the values undergirding fair use. Fair use is widely and vigorously employed in many professional communities. For example, historians regularly quote both other historians' writings and textual sources. Filmmakers and visual artists use, reinterpret, and critique copyrighted material. Scholars illustrate cultural commentary with textual, visual, and musical examples. Fair use is also healthy and vigorous in broadcast news and other commercial media, where references to popular films, classic TV programs, archival images, and popular songs are frequently unlicensed. Some of these other professional communities have also set forth their understandings in consensus documents that may be useful to poets, teachers, scholars, and others involved with creative practices. Although specific groups create such codes, no one needs to be a member of any professional group to benefit from their interpretations. What follows is a code of best practices devised specifically by and for the poetry community. It is meant to enhance the ability of poets, teachers, scholars, and others to rely on fair use by serving as documentation of commonly held understandings about best practices in fair use, drawn from the experience of the poetry community itself and supported by legal analysis. The code is meant as both an illustration of and a guide to which uses of copyrighted materials, as described below, are considered reasonable and appropriate within the poetry community. United States copyright law has several structural features that permit unlicensed quotations from copyrighted works, including the specific exceptions contained in sections 108 and 110. Fair use, which has been part of copyright law for 170 years, is the most important of these features. Where it applies, fair use is a user's right. In fact, as the Supreme Court, recognizing that new creation inevitably incorporates existing material, has pointed out, Fair use keeps copyright from violating the First Amendment. As copyright protects more works for longer periods than ever before, creators face new challenges. Licenses to incorporate copyrighted sources become more expensive and more difficult to obtain, and sometimes are simply unavailable. As a result, fair use is more important today than ever before. Because copyright law does not specify exactly how to apply fair use, the fair use doctrine has a flexibility that works to the advantage of users. Creative needs and practices differ with the field, with technology, and with time. Rather than following a prescriptive formula, lawyers and judges decide whether an unlicensed use of copyrighted material is fair, according to a rule of reason. This means taking all the facts and circumstances into account to decide whether an unlicensed use of copyrighted material generates social or cultural benefits that are greater than the costs it imposes on the copyright owner. This ambiguity in the law can lead creators to be uncertain about whether or not their own uses are fair. However, fair use is flexible, not unreliable. For any particular field of critical or creative activity, lawyers and judges consider expectations and practice in assessing what is fair within that field. In weighing the balance at the heart of fair use analysis, judges refer to 4 types of considerations mentioned in the law: the nature of the use, the nature of the work used, the extent of the use, and its economic effect, the so-called 4 factors. This still leaves much room for interpretation, especially since the law is clear that these are not the only permissible considerations. So how have judges interpreted fair use? In reviewing the history of fair use litigation, we find that judges return again and again to 2 key questions. Did the unlicensed use transform the material taken from the copyrighted work by using it for a different purpose than that of the original? Or did it just repeat the work for the same intent and value as the original? Was the material taken appropriate in kind and amount, considering the nature of the copyrighted work and of the use? If the answers to these 2 questions are yes, a court is likely to find a use fair. Because that is true. Such a use is also less likely to be challenged than other types of uses. Both key questions touch on, among other things, the question of whether the use will cause excessive economic harm to the copyright owner. Courts have told us that copyright owners aren't entitled to an absolute monopoly over transformative uses of their works. By the same token, however, when a use supplants a copyright owner's core market, it is unlikely to be fair. Thus, for example, a textbook author cannot quote large parts of a competitor's book merely to avoid the trouble of writing her own exposition. Yet another consideration influencing the way in which these questions are analyzed is whether the user acted reasonably and in good faith in light of standards of accepted practice in his or her particular field. Thank you for listening to this excerpt from Code of Best Practices in Fair Use for Poetry by the Center for Media and Social Impact. The Center for Media and Social Impact, CMSI, based at American University's School of Communication, is a creative innovation lab and research center that creates, studies, and showcases media for equity, social change, and social justice. For more information, visit their website at cmsimpact.org. This is Squidward, signing off.